My name is Juanli Carrion. I am a creative practitioner whose practice unfolds within community development. Also, I'm an educator, researcher as well, and also activist. Currently, I'm the founder of a non-for-profit organization called OSS Project, in which beyond funding it with Jackie Fisher, I also serve as the executive director, and I'm also an assistant professor of creative community development at Parsons at the New School. And also in the studio, I mean, in relation to care and like how all these different roles that I play fit into the idea of care, I think it is important because it's a practice that I try to keep constant across all of what I do. All my practice has a intersectional approach in which they all feed from each other and they build on top of each other and they scaffold themselves to create what I call my practice. So the thread that runs through my practice is community, but the idea of community or community engagement or working with community, and to work with community from the point of making sure that there is care and involving them in the creative processes. And this happens in my practice in the studio when I do projects that can be more understand as social practice of creative placemaking, in the sense of making sure that those communities I work with are being part of the creative process along the way. In the pedagogical aspect, it is teaching the students and and my students and beyond my students as well, in which are the ways of working with communities in a sustainable way, developing systems and methodologies that will ensure that the work with communities is sustainable and that they do actually community engagement in a way that is mutual and is resilient. And to do this, I have developed extensive curricular work, developing electives under the name of Resilient Mutual Development, graduate minors in creative community development, but also in my research. So in my research, I developed a method, a system that can be handed or can be applied to any creative process, to make sure that the community engagement that happens at the beginning of any creative process ensures the sustainability of that process, of that project. Part of the method that I designed, it is based on creating these resilient mutual developments, right? And to do that, I identified three different pillars or three different important parts that we need to pay attention to. And the three of them are completely related to care. One of them, it is the idea of structures of feelings. So how you as a creative practitioners, when you come in and you show up into a community, you need to be aware of these different structures of feelings and of course this is hard to explain in an interview, but I can at least name them. And these structures of feelings, when you care about recognizing them, about listening, observing the community, and taking the time of doing this, it will give you tools and resources that will help integrate the community and do that engagement with the community in a way more mutual way and more resilient in the sense of creating a buy-in into the community. This connects also with the idea of how we can deal with culture, the idea of the cultural identity of a community, that normally it is approach by designers from design thinking strategies by data, right? By just looking at spreadsheets and looking at data and demographics that gives you the background of a community. But the truth is that it's way more complex than that, and the cultural identity of a community is unique, and it cannot rely only on the data. So caring about doing the work of really learning what is the cultural identity of the community you work with, it is tremendously important as well. That's the second one. And the third one is the socio-political context as well. It's like how much of the socio-political context is impacting that community in the sense of care. How much of that, of the different external factors that are pressing on that community, it is actually shaping or is going to impact the work you're going to be doing with. And there is a lot of nuances in each community that we need to actually analyze. And again, take the time to listen, to learn, to observe, and care about all these things. So those are the three. And analyzing those three, we can jump into doing what I call an economic ecology. And this economic ecology, it is what in design thinking or in many different design processes we call asset mapping. For example, community asset mapping or asset mapping. And but the way that you do that asset mapping is based on creating, for example, a sociogram of relationships within the stakeholders and members of that community that maps not only the value of those stakeholders, but also their relationships between those stakeholders. And based on this, on these relationships, and mapping them and knowing and caring and learning about the relationships and the feelings of these people, you can better understand these assets. And assets is beyond space, beyond resources, beyond, I don't know, like just connections as well. There's many kinds of assets, right? And building that economic ecology is the key, if you ask me, to actually sustain that engagement, because you create for the members of that community to have a buy-in, to have a stake into the project that will prevail and go beyond any grant that you get, any work project based that comes in from a specific designer studio or government agency. It will be something that, yes, those will be there present in the community, but when they are gone, the community will still continue. To do that, what I did in this method is like I brought design thinking and then mix it with creative processes from the arts. What are the difference between those two? Design thinking, it comes from design, and designers, people will argue about this, but they always need kind of like a framework. They need that framework, they need that problem to solve, they need that directions that they can start working from. And artists don't. Artists don't have that framework. They don't need that framework. They actually reject the framework. They come in from this like complete freedom of like looking and seeing and researching and like what is going on here. And designers do the same. They do research, but they do research from a starting point. That's the difference. So when you mix those two in the context of community work, that's where then this new way of approaching this process comes in. An example of how this happens, it will be OSS project. OSS project is, I mentioned before, it is a non-for-profit today that it was co-funded by Jackie Fisher and myself. And the story of that project actually comes as a personal case study or life experience that actually led me to come up with this framework of work or this method of work. And it comes from a history of me doing social practice projects within the art world, in which I was building gardens as ways of kind of create portraits or visualize realities of communities with a specific theme or problem or challenge. And the gardens that I was building, it was both the design of the garden and the programs connected to the garden and the way that the people was engaged into the garden design. It was made particularly to recognize this, but at the same time, the problem was that working with a museum or a foundation or a gallery, or it will mean that the project will last just X amount of time, a year, sometimes two, sometimes even less, just 5-6 months, right? And so that proved also, in the same way that I mentioned before, that creative process from the art side gives more freedom in the creative aspect or approach. The infrastructure of art creates more limitations. And that is where, this connection is so powerful, because design has way more opportunity and power in that sense to create long-lasting, more sustainable solutions, and that work better and that can be more sustainable, that are almost impossible, I don't want to say impossible, but very difficult to achieve within the art world, right? So that's why taking the best of both worlds and putting it together, I think that's more or less what my aim with all this research. And OSS, it is just a case study, or it became a case study in that way. That's how it was founded. Basically, Jackie Fisher, someone who I met in 2014, I think. She approached me and says, "Okay, well, I think this method of using gardening and gardens as a way of giving a platform to a community to address an issue, I think is very powerful." And I think, and she was the one who said, "It's like, I think making this a long-term thing and changing and adapting this to a structure that can sustain longevity and permanency, it would be a good thing." Mm-hmm. So we thought about the non-for-profit model as a way of doing that. I can say that the non-for-profit is not perfect. It definitely presents many challenges in this regard. But we work within the systems that we exist, and we have to make use of what we have, as we are also designing and thinking about other possibilities. And that's what we're doing as well, thinking right now in that. But that's how it was founded. We decided that a non-for-profit will be the best. And then we partnered with NYCHA, the New York Housing Authority, to develop the first permanent garden, the first OSS permanent garden, working with one of the NYCHA developments, which is public housing. And going back to the idea of care and how all this happened, all these structures of feelings that I was talking about, and the cultural identity, and like caring about listening and about learning and about including all the voices of these people in the process from the beginning. It was to first get resources and to do that, to bring them in from the get-go to be part of the process of designing. But that's what we did. So we decided that with the first bucket of funding that we had, we will do that. And we did care of reaching out to doing this mapping, all the stakeholders in the neighborhood, all the different residents of the development where we were going to work, tenants associations, churches, synagogues, mosques, schools, everything. Absolutely, we reached out to every single one and tried to make sure that everyone was heard into this. But through that process, it was not just us informing them of our intention. It was also for us learning about those structural feelings. What was going on in that community? What is the feelings that are, structural feelings are something that change all the time. So, but we were able to, as being so connected and caring about what was going on and learning about what was the actual particular cultural identity of this community, that's what it allowed us to make meaningful, deep connections with them, with the stakeholders, with the community center, with the senior center, with the public school, with the church, with two different churches, with a synagogue, with another senior center, with all the residents. In a way, we design also creative ways of engaging with the residents. I was doing video interviews in their homes, asking them about their history or arrival to the neighborhood, giving them a voice. Then these interviews were part of a website. That in itself also is a sign of care, because you care about giving the space of people to say who they are and how they belong to the space that you are going to work with or the community that you're going to work with. All that process is what I actually will connect more with care. And when you do that, after we did that, took more than almost 2 years, that process. And of course, resources had to go into that. And that's like caring about also making sure that happens is super important. That care about listening, that care about involvement. And also through that process, it was not just listening to them, it was also for us an opportunity to realize that there were some things that the community might not know about what you were trying to do. So you can say, it's like, yeah, we're going to build a garden. And it's like, okay, great. And it's a community garden. So it's going to be different. It's like, we're going to be doing an open call with an artist or an architect or a designer. And you will work together with this architect, designer, artist to design a garden that it will reflect a theme or a challenge that you want to address. And they will be a little lost about all this. It's like, this sounds completely normal to someone who is within design or arts. But for someone who is not necessarily related to these practices, this sounds like, I don't know, another language. So we also care about making sure that the language that we were using and the terms that we were using and what we were saying to them, it was something that they will understand. So we made also the language more accessible, and at the same time, we also give examples of things like this or what we meant, and try to make sure that everything and all pieces of information that we were sharing with them, it was accessible enough for them to understand. And when it was not, we will create the opportunities of learning, what we call mentorship as well. We will mentor some of the members of the community who might end up being the leaders in the project later on. If you don't do that, that is setting up the project for, I don't want to say disaster, but like for having an end. And the question about white gardens in relation to care is the easiest one of them all, because to create a garden, you need to care for your plants. You need to tend, care, nurture a seed and put it in the ground and let it grow and care to water it, to make sure it has the sun, it nurtures everything that it needs. You need to perhaps, every plant needs different care. And that is the perfect entry tool to talk about two things: the importance of tending and caring for something, and like care for something that you are building, you are creating. At the same time, also within a system, within a community. It's a community garden at the end of the story. So it's like, so you're sharing a bed with someone else. You need to communicate with that person. And also it gives an idea, which is one of our major discoveries in this whole experiment, if you wish. It is that it also creates agency and sense of self-sufficiency, which is very important in these communities, which some of the residents are born within these systems that are always coming from a place in which resources are given or resources are handed, and then that creates more difficulties sometimes for them to have more confidence on themselves in the self-sufficiency. It's like, I can do this. I can do this by myself. I can go out there and do this, right? But then when you put them to garden and they see, it's like, I can do this. I can grow a tomato and eat it, and I can grow my own food. And that gives a sense of independency and self-sufficiency. It's not independency, it's like, because we actually teach the other way around. We want to tell them, like, how dependent you are of everything. But that dependency, that radical dependency, it is what actually gives you more independence, more freedom. And that's the magic of the gardens, right? So the garden is just as, I say this now in the board meetings, they say the gardens are just as cues. And this is like, oh, don't say that. It's like, but it is. It's like, gardens is just excuse. It's like, it's a perfect excuse for people. It's so easy to do it because you just have to let them do it. So that's why gardens. And that's something that I grew up, and my family were farmers, and from my mom's side, and I spent a lot of time in the field. So I had that connection early on in my life. That's also super important as well, to learn how, for example, a lot of people coming from the Caribbean, many of them had that connection too. And they were able to connect like this with the idea of growing food. All the work I do is pedagogical. I don't like to say that I wear different hats. I think I'm always wearing the same hat, and I go with my hat to different places, if that makes sense. It's all about that, about just using teaching and pedagogical skills to create, to also serve, and then to educate. So that, I think that's the common denominator. And then how that happens is just bringing the classroom to the garden to the classroom. The garden is the practice, then the classroom is the practice as well at some point. It's like that. I feel sometimes that I'm teaching, and that's also part of my artistic practice or my design practice. When we talk about care, we are talking about many other things, and we might name it differently. But I think it's a beautiful way of approaching it, coming from care, because that's something that is actually lost in today's society. And I don't want to be very political, right? But it's I feel that that's something that we are leaving behind more and more and more and more and more. So putting it in the front line of how we define and how we use the language, I think is very important. So I just wanted to say that I think naming it as care, we can say empathy, we can say many other words, right? But care, I think, is a beautiful way of